The letters above the entrance glowed gold in the cold night air. GRAYSONVENTURES, my last name, my company, a building I had walked into 500 times without a second thought. I stood at the glass doors in my best charcoal jacket, and a security guard I had never seen before stepped directly into my path. He didn't reach for a clipboard or ask my name. He looked at me the way people look when they have already been told what to do. "I'm sorry, sir. This entrance is for event guests only tonight." I started to speak, and that's when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I already knew the way you know a storm is coming before the first drop falls. I looked down at the screen. A text from my son, Nathan. "Dad, please don't come tonight. This isn't the right time. I'll explain everything later." I read it twice. Then I looked up at the guard, still watching me. Not with cruelty, with the discomfort of a man following orders he did not write. Behind the glass, people in formal clothes moved under warm lights, laughing, holding glasses, and celebrating. I could see Nathan's name on the event banner from where I stood. "Tell me, where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments." I stepped back from the entrance and stood near the fountain out front. I read the message again, word by word, like I was studying something written in a language I almost understood. "Please don't come tonight. This isn't the right time. I'll explain everything later." I have known my son for 31 years. I know how he writes when he is upset, short sentences, no punctuation, words running into each other because he cannot get them out fast enough. This message was different. Every word was placed carefully. Every comma sat in exactly the right spot. There was no guilt in it, no apology hiding underneath. It reads the way a legal notice reads: professional, measured, done. Someone had either coached him on what to write, or someone had written it and handed it to him. I could not prove it at that fountain, but I had spent 23 years in business reading documents, and I knew the difference between a son talking to his father and a strategy being executed. That message was not from Nathan's heart. It came from someone's playbook. I put the phone back in my pocket and exhaled slowly. The cold air turned my breath to mist that vanished almost immediately. I stood there and let that understanding sink all the way down before I moved. I did not walk away right then. Maybe I needed one more thing to confirm what I already felt. I stood just beyond the fountain, close enough to see through the tall glass panels lining the front of the venue. The lobby was full. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with silver trays. The lighting was warm and golden, the kind that makes every room look like a success story. Then I saw two of them, board members. Walter Briggs and Ann Poole. Both had been on the Grayson Ventures board for 6 years. I had brought both of them in personally. Walter looked up first, and for exactly 1 second his eyes landed on me through the glass. He did not look surprised. He looked the way people look when something they expected has finally arrived and they are not sure whether to feel relieved or ashamed. Ann turned a moment later, caught the same view, and immediately returned to her conversation. Neither of them waved. Neither moved toward the door. They had both known I would be standing outside. Tonight they had known and said nothing. Not a call, not a warning, not one word from either person whose board seat I had personally approved. I turned from the glass and started walking toward the parking lot. My chest was tight, but my head was clear. My name is Elliot Grayson. I am 58 years old. I live on Birchwood Lane in Columbus, Ohio, in a house I bought with the first real profit I ever made. I coach a junior chess club on Saturday mornings at the public library, because I promised myself years ago I would always do something that had nothing to do with money. I built one company, Grayson Ventures, from a spare bedroom with second-hand furniture and a laptop that overheated after 2 hours. Over 22 years, it grew into a mid-sized investment and property firm with 11 employees, 4 active commercial contracts, and a client list built entirely on trust. The building where my son was celebrating tonight, I financed its full renovation in 2019. The catering company working the event, I introduced them to the venue manager 3 years ago. The board members who turned away through the glass, I vouch for both personally. That entrance the guard was blocking. I stood at it on the day it first opened and shook the construction foreman's hand. If I built all of that, you might ask how I ended up standing outside looking in. That is exactly the question I am going to answer. But first, I need you to understand what this place cost me to build. Not financially, personally. Nathan's mother, Caroline, passed away when he was 6 years old. Ovarian cancer. She was 34. We had just bought the house on Birchwood Lane, and she had planted a small garden in the backyard that I still maintain because it is the last thing I have with her handwriting in it. After she passed, it was just the two of us. I raised Nathan alone through elementary school, middle school, every awkward year of high school, every stumble and recovery that came after. I packed lunches. I sat through school plays. I learned to braid hair by watching videos online because he wanted braids in 4th grade, and I was not going to be the father who could not figure it out. I did all of it while building the company from nothing, which meant long nights and early mornings and years when I was not sure either would survive. But I never let Nathan feel the uncertainty. He always had what he needed. When he showed an interest in business at 19, I did not just encourage him. I began building a real place for him inside what I had built. I funded his education. I opened every door I could find. I gave him a future on purpose, with both hands, without hesitation, because that is what you do when you are that person's only parent. When Nathan was 25, I brought him into Grayson Ventures officially. Not as my assistant, as a true partner with a growing stake in the company. I remember the day I signed the initial partnership documents at our attorney's office on High Street. Nathan wore a blazer slightly too big for his shoulders and signed his name in careful, deliberate letters like the moment deserved that kind of attention. It did. Those documents were a standard support agreement giving Nathan operational authority as his responsibilities grew, with a defined path to expanded ownership tied to performance milestones. I trusted the documents. I trusted the process. And I will be honest with you because this is the part that still sits heavy. I did not read every page as carefully as I should have, not because I was careless. Because I was signing papers with my son on the other side of the table, and the hope in that room carried me further than the fine print should have allowed. I gave Nathan operational control within 3 years. I moved to an advisory role. I never went back to carefully check what those early documents had become as they were updated over time. That was my mistake. Someone else knew it was my mistake long before I did, and they had been counting on it. 2 years ago, a man named Philip Colt entered the picture. He arrived as strategic growth consultant. He had a firm handshake, an expensive haircut, and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you are the smartest person in a room where nobody is checking your math. Nathan introduced him at a company dinner as someone who would help them scale operations. I remember sitting across from Philip that evening and feeling something I could not name yet. Not dislike, exactly. More like the feeling you get when a window in your house is open and you cannot find which one. A faint, persistent draft with no obvious source. Within 60 days of his arrival, Nathan stopped calling me directly, not entirely at first. The calls became less frequent, then shorter, then replaced by emails from Philip's address on Nathan's behalf. Nathan asked me to forward this. Nathan wanted you to have the updated summary. Nathan will circle back after the quarter review. Philip became the interpreter between me and my own son. It happened so gradually, so smoothly, that I almost did not notice the distance growing until it was already wide enough to stand in comfortably. The small things started first, the way they always do. An invitation to the quarterly stakeholder meeting that arrived the morning of instead of 2 weeks prior. A board update sent to everyone except me that I learned about only because Walter mentioned it in passing. A company retreat in April where my name appeared on the original planning list and then vanished from the final confirmation. When I asked Nathan about it, he said it had been an oversight. Philip had handled the logistics. He would sort it next time. There was no apology in his voice and no real discomfort. He said it the way you tell someone the dry cleaning is not ready. A minor inconvenience, nothing more. Then decisions started arriving without me. Choices made on my behalf without my input. A vendor contract renewed at terms I had not reviewed. A property assessment postponed without my sign-off. Each one sitting just below the level that forces a confrontation. Individually, each could be explained away as a communication gap. Collectively, they told a story I was not yet ready to fully read. It did not feel like a son pushing back against a father who held too much. It was colder, more organized, something being taken apart from the inside, one quiet piece at a time. The first real red flag arrived on a Tuesday in August, 7 months before the gala. A thick envelope from a title company I did not recognize, addressed to me at Birchwood Lane. Inside was a summary of a property refinancing decision connected to one of Grayson Ventures' commercial holdings on the east side of Columbus. I had not initiated that refinancing. I had not requested it, discussed it, or approved it. But on the authorization page, clear and unmistakable, was my signature. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. I know my own signature. I have signed my name more times than I can count across every kind of document a life produces. What was on that page was a very good version of my signature, but it was not mine. The margins of the letters were slightly too even. The natural small inconsistency I carry in the tail of the G was completely absent. Someone had studied my signature carefully and replicated it. Not perfectly, but carefully enough to pass through a standard review process. I set the envelope on the table and sat back. My coffee was going cold. The morning was completely quiet. Something that had been building in the back of my mind for months stepped fully and finally into the light. I called Nathan the same morning. He picked up on the third ring, already different from what I was used to. I described the document, read him the authorization language, and said the signature on the page was not mine. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a short pause, not the pause of someone shocked, the pause of someone choosing their words. Dad, that is probably just admin handling a routine update. Philip's team processes a lot of the operational paperwork. Sometimes signatures get authorized by proxy when time is short. I said I had not authorized any proxy for my signature on a title document. He said he would look into it and send me the full file by the end of the week. The full file never arrived. 3 follow-up messages went unanswered for 2 weeks before Philip's address sent a brief reply explaining that the document had been reviewed internally and no irregularities were found. I read that reply twice. Nathan had handed a question about his father's forged signature to the exact person most likely to have caused it, and he did it without blinking. That was the moment I understood that whatever was happening had not happened by accident. Someone had been building something slowly, patiently, and with very deliberate intention, and they believed the foundation was solid enough to hold. The gala announcement came 6 weeks before the event. A company-wide email with polished design, gold lettering, and language about celebrating Grayson Ventures' vision for the next decade. It listed speakers, sponsors, board members, and key personnel. I scrolled through it carefully, looking for my name. It appeared once, near the bottom of the third section in smaller font than everything around it between a catering acknowledgement and a venue note. Special recognition, Elliot Grayson, former advisor and founding contributor. Former advisor. Not the founder, not the owner, not the man who signed the first office lease with a pen that ran out of ink halfway through. Former advisor, like I was someone who had once given Nathan useful suggestions at a coffee shop and then quietly moved on. I read it again to make sure I had not missed something. I had not. I sat with that phrase for a while. 2 words chosen to honor nothing while appearing to acknowledge everything. A title designed to make me sound respected and irrelevant at the exact same time. I did not reply to the email. I did not call. I added it to the small, growing file I had been keeping quietly on my phone. Evidence does not announce itself. It accumulates. And that phrase was one more stone placed carefully on a pile I was only beginning to fully understand the shape of. Standing outside the venue on the night of the gala, everything I had collected over 7 months arranged itself into one clear image. The polished text from Nathan, Walter and Ann turning from the glass, the forged signature in August, the disappearing file, the 2-word demotion in the announcement, Philip's name threaded through every single piece like a wire running through a wall. I had been looking at each thing separately, the way you look at puzzle parts without seeing what they form. Standing there in the cold with Name glowing above the entrance and the guard watching from inside, I finally saw the full picture. I had not been excluded from this event the way a family member gets left off a guest list by mistake. I had been systematically repositioned, moved from owner to advisor to former advisor, step by careful step, over more than a year. Tonight was not the beginning of my removal. Tonight was supposed to be the celebration of its completion. That was what they believed. What they had not considered was that I had spent 22 years learning exactly how this company's structure worked because I had built that structure myself. And there was one thing buried deep inside it that no one had bothered to check because they assumed I would not notice, and then assumed that even if I noticed, I would not act. I did not knock on the glass. I did not call Nathan from the parking lot. I did not text Walter, Ann, or anyone else inside. I pulled my keys from my pocket, walked to my car, and drove home with the radio off and both hands steady on the wheel. People who know me well will tell you I go quiet when something is serious. Not sad quiet. Not angry quiet. The specific kind of quiet that means I have switched from reacting to thinking. I was thinking hard on that drive. I thought about the structure of the company. I thought about the documents I had signed over 20 years and the ones I had not reviewed closely enough. I thought about the early partnership agreement and all the amendments added over time. I thought about one particular clause that my attorney Howard Marks had insisted on including in the original structure when we first formalized Nathan's role. At the time, I had nearly argued against it. Howard told me it was a safeguard, the kind of language that rarely matters in a healthy partnership. I had kept it because Howard had 30 years of experience and a way of being right that made you feel like you had reached the decision yourself. On that drive home in the cold Columbus night, I was deeply grateful Howard had been careful when I was too hopeful to be. I got home at 9:47 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone in the driveway and Nathan had still not called. I went inside, made tea I did not drink, and went to my home office. The filing cabinet in the corner is a 4-drawer dark gray metal unit I have owned for 18 years. I keep hard copies of every significant document I have ever signed. Contracts, deeds, partnership agreements, amendments. I believe in paper. Digital files can be edited, deleted, or quietly replaced. Paper sits in a drawer and waits for you with every original word intact. I pulled the Grayson Ventures files from the second drawer. Founding documents. First office lease. Operating agreement. Every amendment added after Nathan joined. I laid them across my desk in chronological order and read from the beginning slowly, the way I should have been doing every year. By the time I reached the most recent amendment, dated 14 months ago, I had filled half a legal pad with notes. The ownership structure had changed significantly. Nathan's stake had grown. Mine had been reduced. That alone had been discussed in general terms. But the specific numbers on paper did not match what we had discussed, and the process used to make the changes did not match what the original documents required. The company's ownership structure had always been built in layers. My original stake, Nathan's growing share, a reserved portion held in a founding trust that I controlled as trustee. Over the years, amendments had reduced the founding trust percentage in ways that each looked routine. A 2% adjustment here, a 3% reallocation there. Individually, none would trigger a formal review. Collectively, across 11 separate amendments over 4 years, my controlling position had been diluted from 49% to just under 19%. Below the threshold that carried veto authority, below the level that would give me standing to block a major decision. If you looked at the signature lines on those 11 amendments, you would find my name on 8 of them. I remembered signing two. The others had been filed over time through what Philip's team called routine administrative updates. Each one had been recorded with the state, making them legally binding from the moment they were filed. Someone had been very patient. Someone had moved slowly enough that no single step looked like a takeover. But when you laid all 11 amendments side by side on a desk at 10:30 at night, the full shape of what had been done was impossible to miss. My controlling position was almost completely gone. Almost. That last word was the most important one on the entire legal pad. I found the clause on page 31 of the original operating agreement. Howard Marks had written it in 2004, 2 years before Nathan was old enough to understand what a company was. It was written in plain language, not buried in legal complexity. It stated that regardless of ownership percentage, the founding member, defined specifically as Elliot Thomas Grayson, retained sole authority over any contract entered into under the Grayson Ventures founding charter that involved a public event or external venue agreement, where the company name was used as the primary identifier. Howard had called it the name clause. At the time, I thought it was a small formality. What it actually did in practice was give me personal authority over any official event held under the Grayson Ventures name, including galas, including tonight. I read it 3 times. Then I turned to the event contract documents I had quietly requested from the venue 2 weeks earlier. The gala had been booked under the Grayson Ventures founding charter. Nathan's team had used the charter specifically to access the preferred client rate from my original venue agreement in 2018. That rate was registered to the charter. The charter answered Clause 31, and Clause 31 still answered entirely to me completely and legally without a single exception in any of those 11 amendments. I called Howard Marks at 7:15 the next morning. He was already at his desk. Howard is 71 years old and arrives by 6:45 every day because, in his words, the law does not observe a gentleman's schedule. I told him everything. The 11 amendments. The signatures I had not signed. The name clause and the event contract. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual even for Howard. When I finished, he was quiet for a brief moment. Not a thinking pause, a controlled pause. The kind that means what you just heard is exactly as serious as you believed it was. Then he said with perfect calm, "Elliot, they assumed you would not go back to the original document. Everything they built rests on that single assumption." I asked whether the name clause held despite the ownership dilution. He said he needed to review the full amendment trail, but his initial read was that the amendments had not addressed the name clause because Philip's team had likely not identified it as significant. It was too old and too simply worded to register on a modern restructuring review. He asked me to bring everything to his office that afternoon. I drove to High Street at 2 o'clock with the full file under my arm. Howard reviewed everything for 3 hours. When he came out, he said 7 words. "They assumed you would not notice. You noticed." Howard spread the documents across his conference table and walked me through the pattern. It had not been done all at once. That was the key. A single large restructuring would have required formal notification and a review process I could not have missed. Instead, the changes arrived in small increments spread across 4 years, each filed as a routine administrative update. Several came through during periods when I was least engaged, once while recovering from minor surgery. Once during a stretch when I had been away for a personal matter. Howard pointed to the signature lines on the 6 documents I had not signed. The signatures were practiced and consistent, better than the one on the August property refinancing. But Howard kept a document examiner he trusted, Patricia Shee, who had worked with his firm for 20 years. He called her from the conference room. She could review the originals by the end of the week. Howard added that regardless of her findings, the pattern itself was telling. No single person inside Grayson Ventures had both the access and the technical knowledge to execute this kind of gradual restructuring, except someone deeply familiar with the founding documents and the state filing systems. That person was not Nathan. Nathan understood deals and client relationships. The filing systems bored him. This required someone who found them genuinely interesting. Someone exactly and deliberately like Philip Colt. Patricia Shee confirmed it in 4 days. Of the 6 signatures in question, 5 were forgeries. Careful, practiced, and consistent in a way that suggested one hand producing all of them over an extended period. The 6th was a legitimate signature on a document altered after signing, identified through ink analysis and paper stress testing. Howard filed a preservation notice immediately, requiring all original documents to be held intact pending legal review. Then he pulled Philip Colt's full background. What Howard found extended far beyond Grayson Ventures. Philip had worked with 2 other family-owned companies in the previous 8 years. In both cases, he entered as a consultant during a leadership transition, built a close relationship with the incoming generation, and quietly restructured ownership documents over 3 to 4 years. In the first case, the original founder passed away before noticing. In the second, the founder accepted a below-market buyout after being shown performance data suggesting the company was struggling. That data had been prepared by Philip's own firm. Both companies had recovered significantly under new ownership afterward. I read Howard's summary at my kitchen table Thursday evening. Philip Colt was not a strategic growth consultant. He was a patient, deliberate thief who had done this before and expected to do it again. The gala was on Saturday. Howard confirmed Thursday night that the event contract tied to the founding charter was the one critical thread still in my hands. Everything else, the ownership percentage, the board votes, the operational authority, had been carefully moved. But the event could not legally proceed under the founding charter without my authorization, and I had never given it. Nathan's team had apparently assumed the charter was simply a billing mechanism for the venue's preferred client rate. They had not understood that the charter carried a governance condition. The venue manager, Tom Ellery, had worked with me personally since 2018. When Howard called him Friday morning, Tom confirmed the booking referenced the founding charter by name and that he had assumed I was aware of the event given our long history together. He had not received explicit authorization from me. Howard sent a formal notice Friday at noon stating that the use of the founding charter had not received authorization from the founding member as required, and that proceeding without resolution would expose the venue to a contract dispute. Tom Ellery called Howard back within 40 minutes. He said he would need the situation clarified before the event could proceed. Howard told him the founding member was available to discuss resolution at any time. Tom said he would be in contact by morning. He called at 8:14 Saturday, right on schedule. I did not go to the venue Friday night. I did not call Nathan. I sent nothing to Walter, Ann, or Philip. Howard advised me to let the legal notice do its work quietly and allow the situation to develop without my visible involvement. I followed that advice completely. I went home, made dinner, and watched a documentary about migratory birds I had been meaning to get to for weeks. I slept well. Not because I was unaware of what was coming, because I had done everything that needed to be done it cleanly, and had nothing left to manage until morning. There is a particular kind of peace that comes when you have acted carefully and correctly, and simply have to wait for the truth to move at its own speed. I had felt it before in negotiations where I had done my preparation, and only needed to wait for the other side to reach the conclusion I had already reached days earlier. It is quieter than triumph, more like standing on solid ground and watching from a distance while someone else discovers the floor is not where they thought it was. I checked my phone once before bed. Nathan still had not called. Philip's firm had posted about the gala on their website. Walter had shared a photo from the pre-event dinner. Everyone in it was smiling. I put my phone face down and closed my eyes without difficulty. By 9 o'clock Saturday night, the gala was in full swing. I knew because Tom Ellery had called Howard at 8 to confirm the event had begun while the contract issue remained unresolved. Tom had allowed it to proceed on good faith while both sides worked toward resolution, which was professional and which Howard had anticipated. Inside, I imagined it the way I had seen 100 company events over 20 years. The lighting is warm and deliberate. The sound system is full but controlled. People finding their seats, exchanging cards, performing the comfortable rituals of professional celebration. Nathan would be at the front of the room. He was always comfortable in front of a crowd, a quality he had gotten from Caroline, who could walk into any room and make it feel like she had organized it herself. Philip Colt would be nearby, close enough to manage. The board members would be at their tables, satisfied. Everything would look exactly as planned. No one inside knew Tom Ellery had a legal notice in his email. No one inside knew Howard had spent 3 days building a file that changed everything. They believed they had won cleanly. They were celebrating that belief in real time, with glasses raised and speeches being rehearsed, completely unaware of what had already been quietly set in motion outside those walls. Howard told me it happened at 9:34 p.m. during the formal remarks portion of the program. Tom Ellery handled it with real professionalism. He did not interrupt Nathan mid-speech. He waited for a natural pause, then approached the event coordinator quietly and passed a message that there was an urgent administrative matter requiring attention before the evening's contract awards could be formally presented. Those signings were the centerpiece of the program. 3 new partnership agreements representing the company's largest announced deals in 5 years were scheduled to be signed on stage. Those signings required the founding charter to be in good standing. Tom's message made clear it was not. Howard told me the room did not collapse. It shifted. The kind of shift that happens when a few people at the front know something has gone wrong and everyone else can see it on their faces without knowing what. Nathan stepped away from the podium. According to Walter Briggs, who called me 3 days later full of guilt, Nathan's expression moved from confident to confused to something Walter described as a man who pulls a door and finds no wall behind it. Nathan looked right for Philip. Philip was already looking at his phone. Nathan looked left. Ann Poole was studying the tablecloth. At that moment, my son understood what it felt like to reach for something solid and find only air where the ground was supposed to be. Howard described it to me Monday morning with the measured calm he uses for everything. Philip Colt had attempted to reach Tom Ellery directly Saturday night and been redirected to Howard's firm. He had contacted a corporate attorney on retainer and been told the name clause was valid, fully documented, and had not been addressed in any of the 11 amendments. The contract awards were postponed. The event continued in reduced form, the dinner and informal networking, but without the signing ceremony that had been the entire purpose of the evening. By 11 o'clock, 2 of the 3 partnership companies had sent messages asking for clarity before they could proceed. The board held an informal meeting in a venue side room. Walter showed them Howard's preservation notice. Ann Poole asked, according to Walter, who the 6 forged signatures belonged to. No one answered directly. But every person in that room looked at the same empty chair at the same moment. Sunday morning, Nathan called me. Not a text, not an email relayed through Philip. A direct phone call. His name appeared on my screen at 8:17 in the morning. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I picked it up. His voice was not polished or strategic. It was a 31-year-old man who had just discovered that the building he thought he owned had been standing entirely on someone else's foundation. I met Nathan on Tuesday at a coffee shop on 5th Avenue, not the office, neutral ground. He arrived 5 minutes early, which told me something. He wore a plain gray sweater and looked like he had not slept much since Saturday. Philip Colt was not with him. That told me more. I ordered black coffee. Nathan ordered nothing. I let him speak first because I had already said everything through Howard and the legal record. He told me he had not known about the forged signatures. I believed him, not without condition, but enough to hear the rest. He said Philip had handled all the amendment filings, always framing them as standard restructuring, routine and approved. The ownership shifts had been presented as the natural progression of the transition plan we had once discussed in general terms. He trusted Philip because Philip always had a clean, calm answer for everything. I nodded. I know the type. I told Nathan that trust without verification is not a partnership. It is exposure. I told him this company had been built over 22 years on the principle that every document matters and every signature means something. Someone had spent 4 years quietly dismantling that inside our own walls. Howard had filed for full restoration of the founding trust's position that morning. Philip Colt's firm had been formally terminated. The 3 partnership companies were back at the table. The charter was clean. I looked at my son across that small table and said the only thing left to say. He had learned to operate this company. The deals, the rooms, the relationships. What he had never learned was what the company actually rested on. Not the contracts, not the charter, not the name above the door. Me. Every clause, every safeguard, every relationship with Tom Ellery and Howard Marks traced back to years of showing up and doing the work before anyone was watching. Philip had studied the architecture of Grayson Ventures carefully enough to try to take it, but he had studied it from the outside and never understood what made it stand. Nathan was quiet for a long time. Outside, Columbus was gray and still. Then he asked what came next. I told him the truth that was entirely up to him. The door was still open, but this time he would walk through it knowing exactly what it had taken to build. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. He knew how to replace me. He just never learned what actually made me irreplaceable. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.